Jake had always been the terror of the city. His loud bike roared through the streets, and his leather jacket with a skull on the back became a symbol of fear among children and even adults. Tall, with a thick beard and a fierce look, Jake was someone you'd better avoid. On a hot summer day, he stopped his bike near a small park in the city center. On the roadside stood a small table covered with a bright yellow tablecloth. On the table were several plastic cups filled with lemonade and a handwritten sign on cardboard. Lemonade, $1. Behind the table stood a thin girl, around 10 years old, wearing a white dress with blue flowers. She held a pitcher and was carefully pouring lemonade into the cups. Jake slowed down, took off his helmet, and slowly approached the table. The girl looked up at him with her big blue eyes and shyly smiled. "Would you like some lemonade?" she asked in a soft voice. Jake squinted. "How much does it cost?" he asked in a deep voice. $1. The girl handed him a cup. Jake sneered dismissively, crossing his arms over his chest. $1 for lemon water? That's robbery. The girl lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "It's homemade lemonade." "I made it myself," she replied quietly. Jake frowned and took a step closer, looming over the table. "Do you think anyone will pay for this crap?" he said coldly, and grabbed the cup from the table. The liquid spilled slightly onto the tablecloth. "Please don't," the girl whispered, but Jake already brought the cup to his lips. He took a sip and spat it on the ground. Disgusting. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She took a step back, clutching the pitcher in her hands. I tried." Jake threw the cup on the ground, and the plastic bounced with a dull sound off the asphalt. "You don't know anything, kid. With skills like that, you better not sell anything at all." Suddenly, a deep voice came from behind him. "Maybe you just don't understand the taste of real lemonade." Jake slowly turned around and saw two muscular figures standing a few meters away from him. John Cena and Dwayne Johnson, in t-shirts and sunglasses, with their arms crossed, were watching him intently. "What did you say?" Jake rasped. Dwayne took off his sunglasses, and his gaze became sharp like a blade. "I said, maybe the problem isn't with the lemonade, but with your attitude." "This is none of your business," Jake snarled, but there was a hint of doubt in his voice. "You know," John Cena intervened, "you can ruin someone's day in an instant, but fixing it is much harder." Jake briefly glanced at the girl, who was now wiping her eyes with trembling hands. Then he looked back at the two men before him. "And what do you want me to do?" he muttered. Dwayne stepped forward. "Start by apologizing." Jake clenched his fists. His face tightened, but doubt flashed in his eyes. He glanced at the cup lying on the ground. Then he slowly picked it up, squeezing it with his fingers. The girl cautiously lifted her eyes. Jake swallowed. "I'm sorry." The girl blinked, as if not believing what she had heard. "It's okay," she whispered. Jake placed the cup back on the table and turned to John and Dwayne. "Are you satisfied now?" John Cena smiled. "That's something." Jake silently got on his bike, started the engine, and without saying another word, rode down the street. Dwayne and John approached the girl. "What's your name?" Dwayne asked. "Cindy," she answered quietly. John Cena took a $20 bill out of his pocket and placed it on the table. "I think this is the best lemonade in the city." Cindy laughed through her tears. Dwayne picked up the cup and raised it in the air. "To the strongest entrepreneur in the city." They drank the lemonade together. The taste was slightly sour but pleasant, the taste of homemade effort and sincerity. And Jake, riding down the empty street, still felt the aftertaste of that lemonade on his lips. And, perhaps for the first time in a long time, something resembling regret. Jake directed his gaze at the girl, who was trying to lift the plastic table again. Her hands were trembling, and her eyes sparkled with tears she was trying to hold back. He saw her lips quiver as she picked up the lemonade bottle that had fallen to the ground. "Hey, are you deaf?" Jake snapped, approaching her. "I told you to clean this up." The girl took a step back, biting her lip. She looked so small and defenseless next to the burly man in the leather jacket. I'm just. Her voice was trembling, barely audible. Jake grabbed one of the plastic bottles and threw it forcefully to the ground. Lemonade splashed onto the asphalt, landing on the girl's sneakers. She flinched and covered her face with her hands. "Hey!" A loud voice rang out from behind them. Jake spun around sharply. A tall man in a gray t-shirt that hugged his muscular arms was walking toward them. Shiny black shorts and white sneakers clinked slightly against the sidewalk. It was John Cena. His gaze was heavy and cold, his jaw tightly clenched. "What's going on here?" Cena approached, his blue eyes locked on Jake. Jake scoffed. "None of your business, muscle boy. She's standing here without permission. I'm just letting her know she's not welcome here." "Seriously?" John tilted his head, a challenging smile slipping across his face. "Big guy decided to pick on a little girl?" Jake stepped back, but then a strong hand touched his shoulder. "John, ease up," came a calm but confident voice from behind. From behind John emerged another familiar figure, a tall man with a shaved face and a radiant smile. A black t-shirt tightly hugged his broad chest, and tattoos on his forearms were clearly visible on his tan skin. Dwayne Johnson. "Oh, great, another hero," Jake muttered derisively. Dwayne smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "We just want to understand what's happening here," he said calmly. Jake scowled, trying to stand his ground, but his heart was racing in his chest. "She's here without permission," Jake said sharply, pointing at the girl. "I was just explaining the rules to her." "Oh, really?" John crossed his arms over his chest. Because from the outside, it looked a lot different. Dwayne knelt down next to the girl, bringing himself to her level. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, still holding her mouth with her palm. "What's your name?" Dwayne added. "Emma," she whispered quietly. "Nice to meet you, Emma," Dwayne smiled. "Let's help you clean this up." He reached for the bottles on the ground, but Emma quickly bent down and started picking them up herself. "No, it's fine. I can do it." Dwayne gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "We'll do it together, okay?" Jake scoffed. "Seriously? You two are going to protect her? This is teaching her just one thing, that someone will always solve her problems for her." John stepped forward, and Jake instinctively took a step back. "No," John said quietly, his voice calm, but with an underlying threat. "This teaches her that there will always be people around who will protect her." Dwayne stood up, looked at Jake, and slowly walked closer. "Listen, man, we're not here to intimidate you or preach morality. But if you ever come near this girl again or hurt her, we'll be back. And then it'll be a completely different conversation." Jake clenched his fists. His face flushed with anger, but he knew better than to provoke them. "You guys are just," he started, but John interrupted him. "Get out of here." Jake stood still for a moment, then scoffed and turned his back, walking toward his motorcycle. When the engine roared to life, Jake hit the gas and disappeared into the flow of traffic. Dwayne and John both turned to look at Emma. She smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Dwayne smiled. "Always be brave, okay?" John nodded. "And remember, never let people like him make you feel weak." Emma nodded again, her eyes no longer shimmering with tears. Now they held a spark of determination. "Let's help her set up the table," Dwayne said. "And buy some lemonade," John added with a smile. "2 cups?" Emma asked, smiling wider. "No," John winked. 3. Emma stood by her table, watching as John and Dwayne helped her set up the lemonade bottles and napkins. Their strong hands easily lifted the heavy boxes, and she felt something warm spread inside her, a sense of security she hadn't felt in a long time. "I think everything looks perfect now," John said, placing the last bottle on the table. Dwayne smiled. "Ready for business, ma'am." Emma smiled faintly. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you." "Don't worry," John winked. "We promise to help." She lowered her head. twisting the edge of her t-shirt with her fingers. "But what if he comes back?" she asked quietly. Dwayne squatted down to be eye level with her. "If he comes back, we'll be here." John nodded. "And if we're not, you can always call someone for help. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, got it?" Emma nodded, although uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. "And now," said John, grabbing one of the lemonade bottles, "I want to try this legendary lemonade everyone's talking about." "Legendary?" Emma asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. "Oh yes." John laughed. "If you made it yourself, it's already legendary." Emma blushed slightly and opened the bottle, handing it to John. He took a big sip and paused for a moment, thinking. "Well?" Emma asked with a hint of worry in her voice. John pursed his lips, as though seriously considering the taste. "Not bad," he finally said. "Just not bad?" Dwayne asked, feigning indignation as he grabbed another bottle. "Let me try." Dwayne took a sip, then theatrically widened his eyes. "No, John, you're wrong. This is not just not bad. This is the best lemonade I've ever tasted." Emma beamed. "Really?" Dwayne winked. "I know what I'm talking about." John tilted his head and laughed. "All right, I agree. It's really good." Emma stood a little taller with pride. "I made it with my grandmother's recipe. She said the secret is using honey instead of sugar." "That's the trick," Dwayne exclaimed. "Honey is always a win." They chatted a bit more while Emma poured lemonade into cups for a few other passers-by. John and Dwayne helped her, drawing attention from the crowd. Soon, a line had formed at her table. "Looks like business is picking up," John remarked with a smile. "Thanks to you," Emma said quietly. Dwayne knelt in front of her. "No, thanks to you. We just helped a little." John nodded. "And now you know you can always count on help when you need it." Emma looked at them with wide, surprised eyes. "Will you really stay here?" "For now, yes," Dwayne smiled. "We're not in a hurry," added John. Suddenly, the sound of a motorcycle engine roared through the crowd again. All heads turned toward the road. Jake was back. He stopped his motorcycle by the sidewalk and slowly removed his helmet. His eyes narrowed when he saw the line at Emma's table, and the two men standing beside her. "You're still here?" Jake measured Emma with his gaze. "I thought we already sorted this out." Dwayne and John stood synchronously and stepped forward, blocking his path. "We've sorted it out," John said quietly. "But if you want to talk again," Dwayne added, "we're happy to listen." Jake glared at them, his voice full of anger. "You think you can always protect her?" Dwayne smiled. "No. But today we can." John crossed his arms over his chest. "And if you want to test us, feel free to try." Jake stared at them for a moment, then clenched his fists and angrily turned away. "Play around as much as you want. This isn't over." He got on his motorcycle, and the roar of the engine cut through the air again. Jake threw one last angry glance at them before disappearing around the corner. "Do you think he'll come back?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Dwayne looked at John, who shrugged. "If he comes back," John said, "we'll be here." Emma smiled sincerely for the first time that day. "Then I'm not afraid." Dwayne extended his hand, and she easily placed her small palm in his large one. "That's the way," he said. "You're stronger than you think, Emma." They stood together, watching people approach the table for lemonade, and Emma no longer felt afraid. She knew she would never be alone again. Days passed, and Emma's business thrived. People constantly approached her stand, praising the lemonade and asking when she would open another kiosk. John and Dwayne often stopped by to help, whether it was arranging tables or delivering ingredients. They became not only a reliable support for Emma, but also true friends. One warm evening, as the sun was setting behind the horizon, John and Dwayne sat by her table, each holding a glass of lemonade. "So, how does it feel, business lady?" Dwayne asked, winking. Emma smiled. "Honestly, I still can't believe it. But I'm happy." John nodded. "You've earned it." She was about to say something when she saw a familiar silhouette appear from around the corner. Jake. He walked slowly down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, his gaze focused on Emma. Her heart began to race, but this time not from fear. She felt John and Dwayne straighten up immediately, but she gently placed her hand on Dwayne's, stopping him. Jake approached, his face serious, but there was no trace of the anger that had once frightened her in his eyes. "Can I talk to you?" he asked quietly. Emma glanced at John and Dwayne. They nodded silently. "Okay," she replied. They walked a few steps away from the stand. Jake sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I wanted to apologize," he said, looking down. "I was wrong. I hurt you. I thought you belonged to me, but I was wrong." Emma stood listening, and suddenly felt the weight lift from her chest. "I know apologies aren't enough," he continued, "but I want you to know I won't bother you anymore. I just wanted to say that I regret it." Emma paused for a moment and then nodded. "Thank you for saying that." He looked up. "Are you happy?" She glanced at John and Dwayne, who were still standing by the table, watching them closely. John raised an eyebrow, and Dwayne gave a small smile. "Yes," Emma replied. "I'm happy." Jake gave a barely noticeable smile. "I'm glad." He turned and walked away without looking back. Emma watched him go, and for the first time in a long while, there was no fear or pain left in her heart, just relief. Dwayne approached her. "How was it?" Emma exhaled. "I feel like something has finally closed." John smiled. "That's good." "Very good," Emma confirmed. She walked back to the table, grabbed 3 glasses of lemonade, and handed them to John and Dwayne. "To a new beginning," she suggested. Dwayne raised his glass. "To a new beginning." John nodded. "And to the fact that now you have your own team." They clinked their glasses, and Emma felt her heart fill with warmth. She was no longer alone, and while life would undoubtedly throw challenges her way, she knew now she had those beside her she could rely on. And the sun slowly dipped below the horizon, casting a soft light on the 3 friends who laughed and drank lemonade, beginning a new chapter in their lives.